You're live. Okay, my notice says we are live. So I'm going to call this committee back into session. We just spent an hour listening to a presentation on captive insurance. This is their day. I think they ran it for the full legislature, maybe earlier in the day, and for us this afternoon. It is a very good summary of the captive insurance industry and what it does. But we're now back, and Commissioner Bolio, and I see Rebecca is also with us, is going to walk us through the tax presentations in the budget. And Commissioner, you are the first. I gave up trying to get somebody in here immediately after several years ago because they all want to go to the appropriations committees. No one wants to talk to us. So, but there are a lot, if you include all the gambling, I don't know if you're prepared to talk about that, but proposals that are in there. And the other thing I didn't hear anything about was property tax and the one-time money that was in the ed bill. And I don't know if you're prepared to tell us what the proposal is for property taxes. So floor is yours.
So thank you, Madam Chair. So what I'll do, and I hope to do, is talk intelligently about all the things that are part of the tax expenditures of the new budget. There will be many of them that my department is the subject matter expert on, and so I'm happy to go into the details on those. And there will be a few that you had mentioned as well, Madam Chair, that my department and myself are not the expert on, and so I might have to invite the committee to speak with my colleagues around the administration, but hopefully I can at least give you an overview of all of the stuff in there. So I'm going to start. Perfect. I'm going to start by trying to share my screen because I'm going to work from the executive summary of the little budget book. Bear with me 1 second to try to figure out how to do that. I got it to work before, so I know how. Let's see, share screen. That should do it. Okay. All right, are you folks seeing that?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to start under the sources associated with policy changes. The first two are actually two that I am not the expert on and will have to defer to my colleagues at the Department of Liquor and Lottery, but these are proposals that came up last year as well. One is to legalize sports betting, I believe online and in person, and also Keno. I will note that Keno would ordinarily be part of the lottery and therefore going to the education fund. So the governor's budget does propose transferring the money from that to the general fund. But I would defer to my colleagues at DLL to be able to speak to the details of those two proposals. But suffice it to say, overall, the governor is banking on $5.5 million in the budget proposal from those two. And overall, as you look at the total of those sources, would more than offset the tax expenditures that he's proposed. So the first one that I'll jump into is a greatest hits. We'll talk about it, I think, each year until it's passed. And that is removing the tax on military pensions. So this committee is likely very familiar with this request. The goal is to make Vermont more affordable. It's to help with interstate competitiveness, and it's an effort to signal explicitly to military retirees an appreciation for the service. The governor has proposed a 2-year phase-in each time, so it's $1.4 million of foregone revenue in fiscal year 22, which would be a 50% exemption with the expectation of a 100% exemption in the next fiscal year 23. We've hit the points on this before, but I think they're worth talking about. Over 40 states and Washington, D.C. have some kind of exemption for this income, so we're really an outlier in the fact that we don't. Our neighbors, New York and Massachusetts, each exempt it fully, and it does have an impact when military retirees are looking at places to retire. A couple of questions that we've gotten in the past on this that were not able to dig into the data previously, but we are now. The two main ones that come up, the first is, can you speak at all to the income levels of these retirees and make sure that it's not necessarily only wealthier people getting this benefit, and that we were able to look at the data and confirm that that is true. I believe 2/3 of the military retirees, and we have about 2,500 of them in Vermont, according to our data. About 2/3 of them are under $100,000 of adjusted gross income. And what's really interesting on that is that across the board, the military retirement income is only a portion of the income that they bring to the state, right? So they will still be paying income taxes on all other sources of income. And if we are able to recruit additional military retirees with this proposal, they would expectedly bring those other sources of income and increase the income tax base as well. Across the board, our data shows that it's only about 25% of a military retiree's income is the pension itself. And so even as you're looking across the board, the ones that are above 100,000 AGR are more likely to be younger and working other careers, and that's why their incomes are higher. And that feeds into the second question that we've gotten about this proposal before, is looking at the age breakdown of this, right? There's anecdotes that military retirees would likely be younger than the average retiree population, but we haven't been able to prove that in the past. But we did find that there is evidence of that. So over a quarter of the population that get military retirement in the state are under the age of 60, and that's about double the normal rate of non-military retirees that are under the age of 60. And again, as you look at the cross section between age and income, the ones who are on the higher levels of incomes also tend to be on the younger side. So again, showing some evidence that it's because they're bringing other income, other careers, which is really a key piece of the proposal. So, I know we've talked about this a lot. I'm happy to talk about it as much as we need to try to get it across the finish line. But I suspect we'll talk about it every year until it does.
Madam Chair, do you want to do questions as we go or wait till later?
Yes, I think, because this will be, different sections. So
that makes sense. I have like 12 things I'm going to talk about, Madam Chair. So it's probably easiest to do questions.
We did just have our first walkthrough of the bill for the military pensions. So it's kind of fresh in everyone's mind.
Perfect.
So Senator Bray.
Thank you. Commissioner, so I guess a simple question is, you mentioned this about making Vermont more affordable, and I'm trying to think honestly, more affordable for whom, right? I mean, to the degree that if it's a net gain for revenues to the state of Vermont because people arrive and there's other income and there's more revenues that come from them taxed other ways, then sure, it could be a net gain. But otherwise, I do have a little bit of a concern that there's a cost shift, right? We exempt this group and then others will pick up the slack because there's a tax exemption. So can you address the affordability question? Where does the teeter-totter end on this one?
Yeah, it certainly makes it more affordable for the retirees themselves. I can understand some worry about cost shifting if we're not able to attract additional retirees. Hopefully one of the benefits of this would be that it eliminates one of the disadvantages of Vermont, and we can rely on the other advantages of Vermont and why it's a great place to live to try to attract more retirees who will bring that other income and increase the tax base. Sure,
that would be great. And, so for the record, 5 generations of my family have served in the military. There's a lot of support for military, but I'm just trying to think of what we're doing to everyone else who won't receive the benefit. The other thing you mentioned just briefly was that whether or not the state offers this exemption affects choices of those who are going to be relocating. And I'm just wondering how you've gathered that data.
I wouldn't, that is not a result of data, but that is a result of feedback that we have heard from veterans themselves, military retirees themselves, and advocates for military retirees. Advocacy groups around the country track this kind of information. And so we have heard directly from retirees themselves and those organizations that this kind of, this disadvantage goes into the decision-making for some, for sure.
Right. Sure. I mean, do you mean like there are people who came here and they said, I came even though I was disadvantaged to settle in Vermont?
There may be some of those, but we hear from folks who say, boy, I'd love to consider Vermont in my decision of where to retire, but you're going to tax my pension and New York won't.
Okay. Well,
New York's
so this, yeah, I'll just say, I mean, for me, these are one of those things, we all use anecdotes, but the plural of anecdotes, not data. So I'm a little concerned how much we get driven by, stories. So they're valuable, but to me, it begs the question of, do we have data to help us sort out how meaningful the anecdotes are?
Yeah, understood. I mean, this is the billion-dollar question that always happens, right? With tax policy specifically and incentives is how can you prove migration decisions are based on that? And I think where I land is not everybody runs the numbers, but some people run the numbers, right? And that has to be intuitive, right? That there are other elements of tax policy that we make specifically to try to influence behavior, right? We increase taxes on tobacco products to discourage their use. So if we believe that that kind of policy works and does influence behavior, it must follow that elements of other tax policy will influence behavior elsewhere. So, I totally understand the challenge of not being able to precisely say this is the impact of that, but I think we have to assume there's some impact of it. Otherwise, I think it raises a larger question of, what the purpose is of some of the things that we're doing.
All right. So thanks so much. I just wanted to bring it up while we're going through.
Sure.
I had a question. Do military retirees have medical insurance through the military, or would they be here? I mean, I think we know, added tax base, but these are retirees. There's nothing that says you have to be under 50 to qualify. I could be 85 years old and on dialysis and come to be here to be near my daughter. And it could cost the healthcare system a lot of money. Have we looked into any of those offsetting costs?
I don't know if we've looked at that directly. I mean, if somebody was 85, they should be on Medicare as well, right? That should be.
Well, that's what I was wondering. Is there a medical insurance? If they're on Medicare, though, there'll still be a demand on our system of providing the health care. So, okay.
I haven't looked at those tangential costs.
Madam Chair, could I interrupt briefly?
Yes, Senator Brock.
Military retirees do, by law, get health care for life. So they would not be dependent upon us for health care.
Okay, good to know.
Thank you, Senator.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Senator Sorokin.
just want to follow up on some questions that Senator Bray asked earlier. And just put them in a different light. We just went through a similar discussion vis-a-vis Social Security benefits, and the governor's proposal, and it was tweaked by the legislature, had the proposal somewhat means tested where it phased out with people who have income over $60,000. Was any thought given to means testing this exemption?
I haven't considered that. I haven't spoken with the governor about that. I think one of the pieces that was interesting to me was to learn that 2/3 were under the 100,000 of adjusted gross income. So even without that, most are going to be going to at most the moderate income Vermonters. But no, I haven't had discussions on that piece, Senator.
Do you have any ballpark guesstimate from looking at this population if we applied the same standards as we did to Social Security, how much this tax expenditure would cost?
I think that that's analysis that we could do. I don't have that at my fingertips.
Okay.
But now that we have those breakdowns, it's likely something we could look at.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, just to remind the committee and heads up to the commissioner, we did ask Graham Campbell to do exactly that analysis. But, I think it's important. What's the median household income? $57,000. So, and household income. So I think somebody earning $100,000 is has to be understood in the spectrum of Vermont incomes. My question is, since there's 41 states that offer this same proposal here, or some variation of the tax expenditure, tax forgiveness, why would we think that us making this change would lure people here? If this is the driving factor, they'd have to work hard not to go to a state with the same quote unquote benefit.
Yeah, I think the point that we would make, again, going back to the fact that some run the numbers, right, is that there is going to be some group of people who otherwise would make the decision to come here for the other benefits of living in Vermont, right? But for the fact that that this state is going to tax their pension and a neighboring state will not. So there will be some element, there will be some element of folks who will run those numbers and make that different decision.
Okay, we've already discussed this one and there's more coming up. So in the interest of time, we know we're coming back to this because it's a bill. Let's see if we can't move on.
Sure. Next item, and I'm going to go in the order on this sheet. So bear with me as I move around my sheet that is not necessarily in the same order. So the next one is another one with military pay, but a much smaller ask. And it is to create parity for Vermont National Guard members when they are called up to state active duty. So you can be called up to federal active duty or state active duty as a member of the National Guard. And when you are called up on federal active duty, actually, when you're called up on either, you get a subsistence and housing allowance. And it depends on your rank and experience, but might average about $100 a day. When you're called up to federal active duty, those allowances are not part of wages, therefore not part of federal taxable income or Vermont taxable income. But when you're called up on state active duty, the feds consider them wages. So they're federally taxable and therefore taxable at the state level. There's nothing that we can do about the federal tax treatment, right? We can't influence that, but we can change the Vermont tax treatment to provide parity. And as I was learning about this issue, what struck me hardest was the fact that these folks can be doing not just the same types of duties, but what's called side by side, where two people may be working on the exact same project, but one was called up federally and one was called up at the state level, and it creates a different tax situation for it. A really recent example of state active duty was the UVMMC cyber attack, where the National Guard was called in to help sort that out. So this has a very small price tag attached to it. It's $20,000 in the estimate. We actually think it's likely less than that. And the reason that it's so small is because there are a limited number of folks who are called up to state active duty, and the period of time for which they're called up tends to be short. So it doesn't create a big cost to it, but it does have an impact on those folks when they're called up, and really just feels like an equity issue, particularly when they're not only doing the same type of work, but the exact same work.
Okay.
I think this may also have a bill, but I don't know exactly where it is. But I do believe there will be a bill introduced, I think, in the House that will have this language as well.
Okay. I don't think there's any questions on that one.
Okay. Let's see. Next one is expanding the downtown and village center tax credit. So this is an existing program. The goal of this expansion is to help increase investment and support for communities to revitalize buildings, and to also expand the definition of what buildings will qualify for this program. So the existing program was $3 million in fiscal year 21. That was moved up from 2.6 million. And again, this committee may remember that this was a proposal that was brought up last year. It resulted in the $400,000 increase, but there's two parts to the proposal. One is to expand the program so that properties that are within a neighborhood development area qualify. And in addition to that, it's to increase the appropriation by 1.75 million so that the total is 4.75 million. Under current law, buildings can only qualify if they are part of a designated downtown or village. And that's done by a designation by the downtown board through ACCD. There are about 23 designated downtowns around the state, around 200 designated village centers. But the issue is they're very small, right? So take Montpelier, for instance, the designated downtown is really just State Street and Main Street. And in many communities, there are areas right around those designations that could also use the rehab and use the investment and the help. So the hope is that these neighborhood development areas, which are sort of add-on designations surrounding those centers, would help expand the program's reach a little bit to revitalize more elements of those communities. I would note that there are only 4 neighborhood development areas around the state right now, but the hope is that expanding this program to cover those would incentivize additional communities to apply for that designation. And I think one of the, if I'm remembering correctly, and again, this committee may remember, one of the hesitations from last year was if we expand the definition, this is already such a competitive program that it might become so much more competitive and more challenging to get funding through it. So we're hopeful that by tagging the increased appropriation with the expansion of the definition, that's the right mix to get it across the finish line this year.
Madam Chair, just, I don't know if Commissioner knows this or not. Do you know whether the 1.75 is specifically targeted to neighborhood development areas?
I believe this is just adding to the base appropriation, not specific to that part of the program.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Madam Chair, can I ask Commissioner, is this part of the funding based on one-time funding?
This is an increase in the base appropriation. My understanding is that everything that I'm presenting to you today is part of the base.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, let's move on.
Just, Madam Chair,
Yes, Senator
Just-
McDonald.
any downtown designations, are they limited only by the local municipalities redrawing the line?
I don't know the answer to that question, Senator. Unfortunately, I would
Thank
have
you.
to defer to my colleagues at Housing and Community Development for that.
Thank
I'd
you.
be happy to take that question and try to get an answer for you. Okay,
Thank you.
To make sure I understand the question, Senator, are you asking if the size of the designated downtowns and village centers can be expanded at the request of the municipality?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll take that back and see if we can get that answer for you. Keep moving on, Madam Chair.
Yes, I think we've gotten through 3. Of you said 12, so
Some of them are bigger than others, so I think it'll start to move a little quicker here. Nursing incentive. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Bear with me 1 second to get to my. Trying to coincide everything here. So, okay, 1.25 million for a nurse retention incentive. So this is a proposal that, again, should be familiar to the committee. The governor had brought this forward last year, and so we are bringing that proposal forward again. The goal is simple: to expand the nursing workforce in Vermont. The cost is $1.25 million, and the proposal is to do a tax exemption for nurses that follows them for 3 years. And it would be available to Vermont nurses who graduated from Vermont accredited programs. And the first year after graduation, they would receive a 100% exemption on state taxes for nursing income. The second year after graduation would be a 70% exemption, and the third year after graduation would be a 50% exemption. We believe that there are about 450 or 500 RNs and LPNs that graduate each year from these accredited programs. So with a 3-year cycle, you'd be helping up to 1,500 people, maybe even more each year. So the goal is to increase the share of nurses who graduate from Vermont programs who choose to stay in the state. Estimates at this point are that about 30% of them decide to leave and go elsewhere. So with everybody trying to compete for healthcare workers and nurses especially, we're hopeful that this would give Vermont a leg up in that regard.
Okay. any
What's the
questions?
average amount of tax expenditure per nurse in your estimate?
We could pull that. I don't have that at my fingertips. I don't know if Rebecca, if you have easy access to that, but if we don't, happy to grab that, Senator. I don't want to do
that right after.
Okay, yeah, I don't want to do the quick math of total expenditure over the number helped because the percentage changes by the year, Senator. So we'd have to, I think the way we'd break it down is average expenditure per nurse in the first year, second year, and third year. But we can get that to you.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, we can move
Question.
on. Senator McDonald.
So is that only for the immediate years after graduation?
It's for those first 3 years, correct. The program does do a look back. So if we passed it, it would allow people who had graduated over the last 2 years to get the credit as well. But it's only for those first 3 years, yes.
Thank you.
The goal is that, they'd establish a foothold, start families and stick around for the long haul.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, I guess, did you contemplate, I mean, if we need nurses, I'm not sure why we draw the distinction where they got their degree, but did you contemplate like a student loan repayment? There's a lot of ways to see if we can attract particularly professionals that have schooling, to be licensed. And so I'm just curious if you thought of a bunch of them, or you just went to this one right off, or if you dismissed, any reason why we wouldn't think of it with other strategies in addition, maybe.
Yeah, I appreciate that question, Senator. Let me answer both pieces. The one you mentioned that it's only available to graduates of Vermont programs, and that's true. One of the benefits that we're also hoping to achieve is that it helps as a recruitment tool for those programs. Right? We've all read about challenges at some of the Vermont state colleges, so hopefully this would help be a boon in that area as well. The second piece about other strategies. It's not to say that we couldn't also take other strategies in conjunction with this. We had looked at, the idea of student loan forgiveness. I think that was one of the ideas that had come up last year as well. The biggest challenge with that is cost per person that you help, right? In order to be able to do that, these programs are expensive. And so even for instance, I think last year the legislature passed a one-time scholarship with the funds that would have gone to this program. But it's a limited number of folks that can help, right? Because the cost per person helped is so much higher. So that's really one of the driving factors behind why we like this proposal, is that you can help a lot of folks. It still has an impact, right? You need the impact to be meaningful for it to change behavior. We still believe that this is, but it allows you to reach farther. And again, I think the program last year was one time, but this is a proposal for base, so it will be an ongoing source of help.
Okay. Any further questions on this section? All right, let's move on.
Sure. Next line, the manufactured housing tax credit. So this is again an existing program. This is part of the Affordable Housing Credit Program. And there are a number of elements in that program, and I can't speak to all of them, but one of them is the program for manufactured home purchase and replacement. And so this is an existing $425,000 appropriation, though again, not all of that money goes directly to that program. There's a mix of programs that go in there. But the goal of the program is to increase opportunities for lower income Vermonters to upgrade mobile and manufactured homes to new energy efficient models. So, you know, there are a lot of people who can afford the mortgage payment for one of these homes, and certainly could utilize the lower energy costs, but they don't have the money for the down payment. So this program authorizes these affordable housing credits to a Vermont housing agency, and they can sell those credits to taxpayers, non-refundable credits, and then utilize the funding from those sales to issue 0% loans to lower income Vermonters that function as the down payment for these homes. And then the payments on those loans are deferred until the property is sold, refinanced, or transferred. So, you know, it's a great program. It's to qualify for a home to be able to qualify for this program. It has to be either Energy Star certified, or you can also get what they call a zero energy modular home. So, you know, has solar panels on the top of it to try to get to net zero energy. So it really allows folks to get out of what might be outdated, inefficient homes and into newer ones if they just can't afford that down payment. And Senator Sorokin, to speak to a question you had asked earlier, on this proposal, it's asking for a $250,000 increase in the appropriation, but it's also specifically saying that $250,000 has to go to this program. So while the existing appropriation has a mix, and some of it goes to this program and some goes to others, this $250,000 increase is specific for this program.
So what entity sells the credits at this point? Is it VHCB or VHFA?
VHFA. I think it goes through the Champlain Housing Trust.
Okay, and how many units is envisioned to be refurbished or enhanced or new? How many units does 250,000 get you?
That's a great question that I want to get back to you on. I'm frustrated because I know that they said it will double their count, but I don't know what their existing count is today. So let me get you that.
Because I know we've heard in our committee some new units were put in Addison County, and they were $110,000 each. I don't know with the financing here and loans and just the down payment, how many units. I mean, I hate to think there's only a handful of units being bought here, but you'll get back to us.
Yep.
I saw this today in a summary of the proposals, and it said so this is to buy newer manufactured homes now, or you just said maybe a net zero. My biggest concern when we were rebuilding after Irene was, why would we help people invest in homes that depreciate? Because manufactured homes are like cars. They start to depreciate the minute they roll off the lot. And so in that sense, they are not a good investment for people. They aren't going to be able to sell them for more than they paid for them. Wouldn't it be better to help them get into smaller manufactured modular wooden homes, which if you go into these, other than the cardboard walls and the aluminum outside walls, they're the identical layout on the inside. And I just have a concern with investing money to help. If we're going to help people, we should help them move up. And energy efficient is good, but an energy efficient home that will appreciate is better. And that's my only concern, is that we are investing money in housing that isn't really a good investment for folks. If we
So-
could do anything.
Not being an expert on housing, Madam Chair, I might invite the committee to speak with Commissioner Hanford on that.
Oh, we
You know,
will.
I know
Or
also
we
through,
won't. Senator Sirotkin will.
I will. I mean, you're correct. On the flip side of that, you can get roofs over people's heads that are energy efficient, that may last 50 years. And you can ask Senator Brock on the price of the units we're developing. At least this is one area where we can develop them at a reasonable cost.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if anybody's actually looking in to developing stick-built homes at a reasonable cost and what that would take.
I don't believe these are the only investments in housing in the budget, but again, I don't want to speak to
I mean,
the elements
it's
of housing.
just, you want to help people get something that is an investment value. For most people, their home is their biggest savings. It's their biggest investment. It's, as they say, the thing that creates wealth for folks. So just throwing that out for thought.
Yeah. I mean, I do
Move
appreciate
on.
Senator Sirotkin's point as well, right? That it is just an opportunity to get folks into new, higher efficiency, still higher value properties.
And the compromise, the middle ground, there are modular homes that are stick built. And it doesn't have to be a mobile home. It doesn't have to be your classic trailer.
No, they're if you go into them, they're exactly the same house, except for what the walls are built out of. They have garden bathrooms with sunken tubs. I can visualize the entire layout. There's a standard layout, and they come in modular or they come in mobile. And I just want to make sure that we invest in the best that we can.
Commissioner, are we still making those kinds of homes you're describing up in Morrisville? The Vermont, I think it was called. It was quite a success story right after I read, but I'm curious if there's an economic development piece of that as well.
Unfortunately, I don't have info on that. I wish I could speak more intelligently on this proposal. I apologize, folks, but really would invite the committee to talk to Commissioner Hanford.
Okay,
I think he could speak readily to these questions.
thanks.
They are still making Vermont, because I live right next to a trailer park, and there's 3 of them going in. They took out older units and they're putting Vermonts in.
Manufactured homes or modulars?
I guess you'd call a manufacturer. They arrive on a set of wheels and get lifted off onto pylons.
Tie
that have
down
been-
slab.
Some are going on, a couple are going to pre-existing slabs, and one is going where they put like very large screws into the ground. And
But
they
if we
sit
did
on
that
top of
with
those.
a wooden modular that arguably we could make out of Vermont wood, the value would appreciate the day that home hit the ground, the day that house with metal sides and wheels that are tied down hits the ground, it starts to depreciate.
Right.
So just if you're thinking about economic development, we can
Right.
move
I
on.
think these, so I don't know what the dividing line is. These things come on wheels, but then get lifted off by crane onto something else. So they're not still on wheels anymore. I don't know if that makes a difference.
Does to some financiers, they have to be tied down. But if the walls are metal and the inside walls are cardboard with metal framing, it's a manufactured home.
The Vermods, are being manufactured, and I remember hearing they were like $6 a year to. I think that was the one with the solar panels, but extremely low operating costs, which is enticing for folks
There was
who live in fixed income.
There was net zero homes that were being made. Maybe it's the same group. Wasn't last year, must have been the year before, and they were installing some, I think, in Middlesex. But yeah, that would be, a very good investment on a number of fronts.
Yeah, I think
So
I had heard.
anyway,
I think I had heard them referred to as the ZEM module, the ZEM, Zero Energy Modular. I did get an update. So I think the current program covers 32 homes a year. So if they're doubling that, it should be an additional 32. I think Senator Sirotkin, you had asked that question.
so we can move forward.
Sorry, you cut out for a second, Madam Chair. Did you say move
I was
on?
going to say, yeah, I think we're ready to move forward.
Sure. I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen because the other elements are either from the education fund or just otherwise not listed on here. But so I'll just speak to them. One thing you heard yesterday in the governor's speech was about tourism and marketing funding. So Vermont has the lowest tourism and marketing budget when you compare to our neighbors. So I believe that department's budget right now is a little over 3.5. I think it's 3.6 million. New Hampshire is 9.5 million. Massachusetts is 10 million, and Maine is 16.7 million. So certainly, as we continue navigating the COVID-19 pandemic and recovery afterwards, we'd like to try to continue to advertise Vermont as a high-quality tourist destination. So the proposal is to create a dedicated tourism and marketing fund, seed it with 1 million of general fund this year that will help the department continue to advocate for safe travel when available, and also help towards additional travel when we've moved in further into the recovery phase. And then on an ongoing basis, fund it through a share of meals and rooms tax revenues in years that the meals and rooms tax revenues exceed the consensus revenue forecast. So help feed the fund when revenues are strong, so that it's available at times when revenues are not for investment in tourism and marketing. I would envision this transfer happening at the end of a fiscal year and comparing it to the January consensus revenue forecast and making the transfers at those times. But certainly, with tourism being at least 10% of the Vermont economy, 30,000 plus jobs, this is a critical element. And it also provides a funding stream that has some relation to the businesses who are collecting that tax on our behalf, right? So businesses collect businesses in the tourism industry collect meals and rooms tax on behalf of the state. And this would be an explicit message to them that there are some direct investments back in to try to help the businesses who are doing that for us.
Now, I'm starting to see rooms and meals as kind of like what we used to do with fees on traffic tickets until we had 30,000 people driving around without licenses because they couldn't pay the fees we put on. We've got a portion of rooms and meals that goes to the property tax. I believe we gave a portion of rooms and meals to clean water.
Yes.
Okay. Is this what's left? I mean, I know clean water is underfunded.
Yeah, so the current split is 69% general fund, 6% clean water, 25% education fund. So this is not looking to take money away from the education fund or clean water even after that exceeds revenue forecasts. This is looking to repurpose the general fund portion that exceeds revenue forecasts.
What happens
It's
if
taking it from the general fund.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that question.
So does that mean it's taking it from the general fund?
Yes, in years
Oh,
where
okay.
I mean, in
Okay,
years,
thank you.
again, in years where it exceeds the consensus revenue forecast, right? So it's not necessarily taking it from the general fund, but it's stopping it from becoming
Right.
one-time money for the subsequent.
It's not
All right.
wordsmithing. That's where it's coming from. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Senator Sirotkin.
I have sort of a similar question. What happens if the rooms and meals tax comes in under forecast? Are they give the money back?
Well, so again, mechanically, I think you do it at the end of the fiscal year. So this wouldn't be an ongoing thing, right? Because I think you'd run into that exact problem that you're mentioning, right? If we start to exceed the July consensus forecast, clearly that forecast is going to be upgraded in January, right? And you don't want to end up in a year where you're under at the end. So I think you would wait until the end of a fiscal year. If you're under, the fund doesn't get a transfer. If you're over, then the fund does. So we shouldn't be
there's
in a
an
position where we have to
incentive
claw
to,
back.
There's an incentive by, if that's your goal, to have a low forecast. So simple enough.
I would hope that the consensus forecast wouldn't be artificially lowered just to fund this, but sure, I suppose that's a risk.
But I think it sounds good, but to say to the agency, you're not going to get to advertise this year because the fund is down because the economy's bad and people aren't eating out. I think we can all hear the arguments about when the economy's down and things are bad, that's when you need to advertise the most. I think it's we can do it, but it is setting ourselves up for some pain.
Yeah, I hear you. So let me respond to that in two ways, because we've talked about that internally as well. So the first is that this is not replacing the base operating budget for the Department of Tourism and Marketing. This would be in addition to that, right? So it's not as if revenues are down that this department has to shut down. But the goal would be that you could hold this money. The language is such that the fund carries over from year to year, so that it's funded at times where revenues are strong and can be utilized at times when revenues are bad. Because you're right. That's the time you want to advertise the most, right? To try to get that recovery.
Okay. Anything else?
We couldn't hear
More
you.
to go through, Commissioner?
I've got a few more.
We're
Okay.
speechless.
I'm explaining.
Make Senator
everything slowly.
McDonald speechless is quite a
It was
is an
accounting for the silence.
accomplishment.
I take that as a compliment. I must be doing such a great job, leading to no questions at all. I'm ready to pass this thing out unanimously today. If you guys are, that's fine.
No problem.
This next one is the other sort of the big one on the list, and so it'll get a little bit weedy, and I suspect it's best for us to talk more as well, but I want to give you some background. So the governor's proposing to have an expansion of the manufacturing exemption for sales and use tax. And this is one that I'm particularly excited about as the tax commissioner. This exemption is a bear. Right. So we have an exemption for sales tax for raw materials for purposes of manufacturing, and also machinery and equipment that is used in the manufacturing process. But through our statute and reg, we are under what's called the direct use standard, which means it only qualifies for the exemption if the machinery or equipment that is making a physical change to the product. And what we are attempting to do with the language that we are hopeful the legislature will consider is move toward the integrated plant standard, which is to say that machinery and equipment that is integral to the manufacturing process is exempt. And so let me just give you a brief overview of what that would mean, right? Within the manufacturing process, and you can define when that starts and ends, and states have a whole gamut of defining that, right? That's one of the big challenges of this proposal, is that even though I described two approaches to you, it doesn't mean that a bunch of states have language that means one thing and a bunch of states have language that means another. There's a whole spectrum of what's out there. But Vermont has defined the beginning of the manufacturing process as when it is removed from storage for purposes of starting the manufacturing process, and it ends it at initial packaging. I was reminded by another committee that I think 6 or 7 years ago, the legislature did add secondary packaging to that when the secondary packaging is the same machine as the initial packaging. But generally speaking, it ends at initial packaging. This proposal is not an expansion to those goalposts. We are still looking for it to be within removal from storage to initial packaging or secondary packaging. I'm sorry, I guess I should say we are asking it to be all secondary packaging. But we want everything between those goalposts to be exempt, because what happens right now is we have very challenging audits that are extremely frustrating for taxpayers. And they are not necessarily trying to do the wrong thing or skirt the law. They're trying to do the right thing. They're trying to interpret the law. Our folks are trying to administer the law. And every year we get very controversial cases, very frustrating cases where a business feels like it's coming out of left field that it has a substantial tax bill because they believed a machine was exempt when it wasn't, right? And some examples of that might be a machine that doesn't change the product but just moves it, right? Waste removal, heating or cooling, certain types of quality control may not qualify. So there's all these things that are not intuitive either, right, for us or for the business, that cause a lot of these issues. And in fact, as we were doing research for this proposal and trying to come up with a fiscal estimate, we realized that most of the use tax that we get on machinery in this realm that we believe is not exempt come directly from audits or from taxpayers who have been audited. So I think we have a fair voluntary compliance issue. So this is also an attempt to create a level playing field, right? Let's take away some of this counterintuitive stuff. Don't blow the whole exemption up so it's everything, right? It's not like vending machines in the break room are exempt now. It'll still just be talking about the manufacturing process. But hopefully clean up some of these inconsistencies, reduce the number of surprising, frustrating audits. We've lost some cases in court on this, again, because they're counterintuitive. So hopefully avoid those kind of elements in litigation. So again, it's the language is really technical, and I'd really love to bring back my general counsel to talk to some of the technical nature about it too. Our fiscal estimate on it is $700,000 of foregone ed fund revenue, which I recognize probably sounds small at first blush when we're talking about expensive equipment. But again, it's only an expansion of an existing exemption. So most of this stuff is already exempt, but there are some things that fall through the cracks and create these challenges. Our neighbors also, like New York, has a more generous exemption than we do. Massachusetts might be closer in line to what we have now, but there's also an economic development aspect here. Particularly, Vermont has a lot of small artisan food manufacturers, brewers. Folks like that are the ones that get caught up in this.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Senator Sorokin.
can you just back up, Commissioner, and explain what the tax is? I understand what you're saying in terms of broadening it, but is it taxing the purchase of this machinery or the use of the machinery or the depreciation of the? Could you just explain what the tax is?
Yeah, sorry, it's the sales tax on the machinery. So most of it is exempt from sales tax, but they end up getting caught in use tax audits on when they get machinery that doesn't happen to fall into this, but people believe that it should have.
So I've got two machines that would be exempt because they manipulate the product somehow. But the conveyor belt between the two, I can see if it's a separate conveyor belt, but if it's comes connected to the two machines, then is it a separate machine?
You're identifying some of the challenges, Madam Chair. I mean,
I beat Senator McDonald at that.
One of the cases that we lost had to do with cleaning the machines right after the process, right? And so it wasn't part of the manufacturing process, but of course, a court is like, of course, you can't you can't use the machine without cleaning it, right? But it doesn't fall within those bookends. So it's those kind of things that become an issue. Again, I did mention that we do have two things that expand the goalposts of what is in the manufacturing process. So one that we are asking for in the language, and again, I'm happy to come back and get into the real details of this language, but one is quality control. We're asking for that to count even if it is between initial and final packaging. We've had cases before where companies have quality control machines. Maybe you put your product into some kind of shrink wrap, individually wrapped, and then you put it into a larger package for retail sale. If you do your quality control between those steps, it's taxable. If you did your quality control right before that initial packaging, not taxable. So again, it's a really counterintuitive thing. People are frustrated where they're like, if I just changed one step in my manufacturing process, I would have saved a bunch of money. So we are asking for quality control to count between initial and secondary packaging. And we're also asking for a clarification that all secondary packaging machines would count as exempt, not just the ones that are the same machine as the initial packaging.
Okay.
I think I froze.
No,
back.
I think you've got us all in shock. I'm going to see, I've got Senator Hardy and then Senator Pearson.
Thank you. This is, I'm trying to imagine, I'll just sort of visualize this. But I had a question that was similar to Senator Sorokin, but my other question is, if this is a sales tax, then this is just a one-time tax. So they would pay the sales tax when they purchase the equipment, and then they wouldn't have another sales tax due until they needed to replace the equipment. Is that correct? Or is there an annual tax that I'm missing in here somewhere?
Nope, you're correct, Senator. Just the one-time sales tax.
Okay, but there's enough equipment purchased every year that this would be a $700,000 foregone tax revenue because of new equipment purchases annually?
Yeah, and I think you've stumbled upon one of the challenges of estimating this, right? Because it's not necessarily a consistent hit. It happens when new plants get constructed or when companies upgrade their manufacturing line. And that might happen with one machine. When it breaks, that might happen with an entire manufacturing line. But it's also one of the reasons that these are so painful for the businesses who get caught up in this, right? Because it's a very substantial one-time tax liability.
Okay. And are there any current requirements about size of business, or is this all sorts of, tiny little businesses that, package beer and huge manufacturers? I mean, to the extent that Vermont has anything that's huge.
Yeah, it's across the gamut.
Okay. Thank you.
My little $2,000 knitting machine, which produced sweaters and my yarn, would have been tax exempt because they were being used. You go in, you say, here's my tax number. I was early enough. I probably did pay sales tax on my knitting machine, but
did you have a business?
I had a business. I still have a sales tax number. And I think the only person in Montpelier that absolutely counted every ball of yarn in my inventory and paid my full inventory tax.
We appreciate that, Madam Chair.
It was painful. But it's equipment that manufactures, and that's what I did. I manufactured knitwear and sold it.
When we passed Act 60, we eliminated those taxes for education.
Yeah, they just did away with in Montpelier the inventory tax. There were rumors of mass migration of railroad cars that went and equipment that went to New Hampshire or another town on certain days when the tax was counted. But every downtown you were supposed to pay. So if times were bad and you had a lot of inventory, you paid a higher tax. It was somewhat regressive. But that's gone. Senator Pearson.
That was the part of the bargain for Vermont industrial people who were in machinery and equipment industry, had that entire thing wiped out. And now we're back here trying to give that group more attention and having the rest of the other people pick it up. So
I'd forgotten that rant. Okay, Sandra Pearson.
Just to give us some context, how much does the current exemption cost?
Rebecca, do you know that number from I don't have that at my fingertips. Is that on the tax expenditure report?
No, I don't have that handy, but I actually should look there.
We're happy to try to get that for you, Senator.
Thanks.
I've got
Just to say something friendly and helpful, having worked on a manufacturing line, a lot of these things get reconfigured all the time. So I can imagine it's tricky to say if something is part of something before it, after it. That seems like part of the way manufacturing has evolved is that you have adoptable lines, right? Piece of machinery could be before or after something else. It'd be hard to know how to deal with it.
It's quite frustrating for everybody, us at the department and the businesses.
And some of us were here when, at our instruction, the department did a lot of audits. And there were a lot of Vermont taxpayers who thought they had been doing the right thing, starting with the tax preparers. And it was a painful few years. Wood mulch, if you sold it for farming or agricultural purposes, wasn't taxable. And if you sold it for my rose garden, it was. And it was up there with ice. But it was painful because it was really people who thought they were doing the right thing. And the tax audit came in and said, nope, and you owe us. And it was enough to put, usually my understanding is there was a settlement, but no one can tell you that. But the numbers would have bankrupt some of these businesses that are back taxes. And it was frightening and it was painful. And I just soon, if we could avoid it, avoid it.
Us too.
Yeah, I'm sure it was painful for you. Okay.
I've got 3 left, Madam Chair, 2 of which are very small and 1 of which is medium sized. So I'm happy to power through the last few here. I want to be sensitive to time as well. All right, so you will also remember from the speech yesterday, actually was in the inaugural as well, that the governor is proposing a property tax exemption for pre-K facilities and childcare facilities. So, the goal of this one is pretty straightforward: help control the costs for those businesses, help them stay in business, help encourage new folks to get into that realm as well, and really is part of the goal of as the governor has mentioned, building the best cradle to career education system. So this is a 2-year proposal, but our ask is to move on both pieces now because there's some prep we have to do for the second piece. The first part of the proposal is a full property tax exemption for licensed pre-K facilities, be it in a commercial building or in a home-based program. If they're licensed under Act 166, they would qualify under this first round, and that would be in fiscal year 22. And then in fiscal year 23, a 40% property value exemption for all other licensed childcare providers and registered home providers. And that would be on, in both cases, for the pre-K or the $40,000 property exemption. For the home-based ones, that's on the non-homestead portion of their property. And that's really the reason that we need the second year for the registered home non-pre-K facilities, because we need to change the homestead declaration to be able to accommodate that. So in terms of the cost for this fiscal year 22, the pre-K exemption is $530,000. And then in fiscal year 23, when we have the full audience, that's foregone revenue of $830,000. I think one of the big pieces here is that many of these programs are part of already exempt school districts, already exempt buildings owned by school districts. And so there's an equity issue there. There's also some regional challenges. Each of these categorizations happens at the town level. So to the degree that there's inconsistency in how towns are handling it, it can lead to regional inequity. Last big piece of this is there's some litigation that's happening on this. At least one case that we're aware of, where a child care facility is claiming that they should already be exempt. And so this is also an effort to be proactive on that and just say, let's stop battling about this. Let's just say they're exempt. One of the challenges right now, I think, is case law on this. And again, I defer to maybe Abby knows this, or my general counsel could come back, but I believe there's like a 1982 case on this that has really some problematic language, but essentially says they're taxable. And then a more recent case from 2017 that says the 1982 case has some really problematic language, but doesn't go as far as saying they're not taxable. So there's additional litigation happening in this realm, but we just want to get ahead of that and say they're not taxable.
Not taxable for the statewide property tax.
Education.
For the locals, but they would still be taxable for the municipal.
Right.
Property tax, because they do get fire and police service and all that stuff.
Right.
All right. Senator Hardy.
So I'm look forward to seeing the language on this one. But is the home-based care programs, if you have a home-based childcare business that's in your residential home, which most of them are, how do you split out homestead versus non-homestead if it's just a small, or regular sized home that somebody lives in the same space that they're also providing childcare in? These aren't usually really big places.
Yeah, great question, Senator. So on our existing homestead declaration, taxpayers are required to indicate the percentage of business use of their home. So the portion of the home that is used for the child care needs to be reported. One of the reasons we need the extra year to make accommodations on the homestead declaration form is that homestead regulations say if it's less than 25% of your home, you should report 0 so that your entire property is homestead, which is fine. But it wouldn't allow people who are using less than 25% of their home to take advantage of this exemption because they will have no non-homestead property. For the ones who are reporting more than 25%, we would utilize that percentage from their homestead declaration. That portion of their property will be deemed non-homestead. And so then if they're a licensed pre-K facility, that entire portion would become exempt from education tax. And if it's a registered home, not a licensed pre-K, but a registered home childcare, that would get the up to 40,000 of the non-homestead value exempted from education tax.
Oh, okay, so it's up to 40,000. I wrote down 40%, but it's up to 40,000. So I misheard you.
Up to 40,000. Yep.
Okay, and what about if these providers, whether they're home providers or private facilities, are doing infant and toddler programs, not just pre-K programs? How are you calculating what percentage or portion of their business is pre-K versus infants and toddlers?
If they're like you're saying they're doing both, they're licensed pre-K, but they're also doing this other work.
Yeah.
If they're in a commercial building, we would exempt the entirety of that building. If they're in a home-based program, we would exempt the entirety of that non-homestead property. We talked, this is a challenge, right? Because often you're using the same space as well, right? It may not be at the exact same time, but you're using the same kind of spaces. It didn't seem worth it to us to try to parse that out for everybody. It just feels like a challenge that's insurmountable to do that. So the proposal is to just exempt those properties if they're licensed pre-K or the
Okay, so it's not, you specifically said licensed pre-K under Act 166. So I was wondering if you meant to be that precise or if it's just any childcare provider so what if they're only infants and toddlers?
So if they're not licensed under Act 166, but they are a licensed childcare provider or a registered home provider with AHS, they would get the $40,000 property value exemption. To get the full property exemption, it's got to be licensed pre-K under Act 166.
I see. Okay. I'm assuming there's language on this somewhere that I can look at. I'll have more questions for you after I look at that. But
Oh, this one we will be looking at.
yeah, probably in both of our committees, Anne. All right. Thank you.
Sure.
So
Okay.
I have a question, Commissioner. Just could you get us some sort of, is there a place where we can see like a laundry list of the kinds of businesses that are exempt from the property tax? And, you know, I'm certainly inclined to favor this, but I just want to know, just like with the military pension, who's the next group coming in asking for property tax exemptions? Who historically have we exempted? I remember about 10 years ago, there was a huge fight over fraternities at UVM of a property tax exemption. I just want to get a flavor of who's covered and who's exempt right now from property taxes.
Happy to gather that for you. It can be a little bit of a complicated question, right? Because there's a public, pious, and charitable exemption as well. And that's, there's a number of different tests that you have to do. So it's not necessarily all one category, but I'm happy to take that back, gather that up, and come back with some folks who can speak in some detail to that.
Great.
I remember seeing lists because we did try a few years. We looked at it, and I think that's when the fraternity sorority issue came up. We did look at it. There's a lot of senior housing out there that wasn't happy having us look at it, but there are very detailed lists, and we can go back and look at them again, Senator, or you can browse and decide if you want to do that.
And also, I mean, there's lists of the licensed childcare providers as well, right? So that's public information that to get a sense of who would become exempt under this or get a partial exemption.
Some of them are already exempt because they're nonprofit organizations. So they would be under the charitable and pious blah, blah, blah exemption already.
Yeah, or part of a school. Many of them are part of school districts.
Right. Yeah.
In the school building. Yeah. Or I suppose if you're renting space in a church basement. So.
Yeah, the public, pious, and charitable exemption is a complicated one.
It's sensitive.
I have two small ones left, Madam Chair. They're both sunset date extensions.
Okay.
So the first is the healthcare IT fund sunset date. That is set to sunset at the end of this fiscal year, and we are requesting that it's extended for 2 years. That fund is funded by a portion of healthcare claims tax. You'll remember that tax was enacted in 2013, and I think it's just under 1% of total claims, medical, dental, pharmaceutical, that insurance companies pay out. 20% of that revenue goes into this fund. And the fund's purpose is to help promote and improve health information exchange. So certainly I think we would all recognize that as critical infrastructure right now. That exchange has been integral to, COVID contact tracing, vaccine tracking, epidemiological modeling, all of those kind of things. So asking for a 2-year extension on that. I believe the projection for fiscal year 22 is 4.2 million. So the total healthcare claims tax is about 20 million, just over 20 million. So this 20% of this brings 4.2. Sorry, Senator.
Is that a tax increase, Commissioner?
No, because this is existing. It's just continuing that. The other 80% goes to the general fund. You may remember that it used to go to the Special Healthcare Resources Fund, but that was changed last year or the year before to just go to the general fund.
Second one.
Second one is the home health agency assessment. And unfortunately, this is not one I'm an expert on, but it's a piece of the provider tax. And I think the revenue forecast on that is 5 to 6 million. Again, it's an existing program scheduled to sunset at the end of this fiscal year. And the request is an extension of 2 years.
That one I know has been controversial because my local home health people talk to me every year where they were told that what it was going to cost was 80 million and it's cost significantly more than that. So that one there may be, and we took the home health providers out of the regular provider tax because it didn't fit in, or the for-profits weren't paying anything. Senator Sorokin, I think this started before I came back to the committee, because I remember it took a couple years to set this particular tax. So this one there will be some discussion around, I'm sure, by the payers.
I'd welcome the committee to talk with folks at the Department of Vermont Health Access as well.
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
Get a contact for that.
No. Some of us know them very well because we're on health and welfare.
Sure.
Not quite speed dial, but close. Okay. Any other questions, folks? Senator Bray.
Thanks. This is a real sort of beginner question. I was just thinking back to something like the nursing credit. So that's going to be an ongoing investment to help retain nurses who graduate here in state. What's the source of the funding for now? And the question we're always having is, how sustainable is this? Is it that we have one-time money, and so we're standing up the program, but we're going to create an ongoing obligation? Or can you describe how that works? I mean, in essence, because we're giving a tax exemption, so we're going to reduce our income in the future. Now we're either going to be short of money or we're going to fill with something else. And I'm trying to understand how we maintain that program.
Yeah. Happy to answer that, Senator. So you're right. It's a tax expenditure, right? So it doesn't require an appropriation each year, but it would just go into consideration when the economists do the consensus revenue forecasts, right? That it would be reducing income by an estimated $1.25 million in that next year. So it's not one-time money or anything like that, and it doesn't require a separate investment, but it does need to be taken into consideration when forecasting future revenues for future budgets. I don't know if I answered your question, but.
Well, yeah, I guess, if revenues are generally growing, you could say, well, there'll always be room for it, but it would seem as though, in essence, we're reducing our own future income. And so if we're going to maintain every other service without a cut, where something else will have to give, or the economy grows enough to backfill. But I just worry about when we set it up. It sounds sort of like, quote unquote, easy money when we give a tax exemption, but over time the bill comes due in one way or another. And I'm just trying to make sure we don't create a program for students, in this case, that we then can't maintain for the long haul.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're sort of highlighting just the concept of tax expenditures, right? I mean, I think there's really when you talk about tax expenditures, there's two ways to look at it, right? One is that some of them may end up paying for themselves if they incentivize behavior that brings in other tax revenue, increases the tax base. And the other is just that you want to make an investment in something, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to pay for itself. And in this case,
right,
I don't have the data to speak to whether it would or not with other economic activity that's brought in, but you want to compete with other states that are also trying to fight to get additional nurses in the workforce. And so you could just look at this as an investment that, it'll reduce revenues, but it's similar to how you might make an appropriation for a program like that.
Sure. Right.
But they it sort of becomes self-sustaining because they're just part of the base. They're just part of the base revenue.
Except that we are doing say we have now, in order to get a veteran's pension. Okay, we are double dipping there. Senator McDonald.
So I appreciate Senator Bray's question. And if we chose not to do a tax expenditure, which I think the Commissioner just said was similar to an appropriation, you would have to pay for these things with new revenues, would you not?
Well, the governor is proposing two elements of new revenues to help offset the tax expenditure in this case.
I thought I caught no new taxes and no new fees in his presentation yesterday.
I wouldn't call these new taxes necessarily. It's lottery.
We're
and-
going to have Graham in. There's several gambling
So
components. So we will have Graham, because I know he's done a summary, and we'll have liquor and lottery in to talk to us about some of the new revenue proposals. Okay.
I mean, there's no tax increases in there, right? It's a new program that has revenue attached to it.
This is how many years in a row we had no new tax increases, and we keep carving out the general fund by denying it revenues through tax credits and exemptions and other projects that may be pet projects or may be good public policy. But this is the one way to get something approved is don't go to appropriations and ask like everyone else, take it out before it gets there.
That's why the money chairs meet. Okay, Senator Pearson.
My question may be actually one that for Senator Sorokin as well. I seem to recall an estimate on the online gambling, on the sports betting, being pretty low from RJFO. And I'm just wondering, you have an estimate that was on your slide for what that would generate. Did you work with Graham or is it, an independent estimate, or can you just help us understand that? Or maybe Michael, was that one of the places where we were frustrated with their estimate coming in pretty low?
Yeah, I think we were, but it varied from the beginning to the out years. But it was pretty wide ranging. Some people said 1 million, some people said 10 million. I don't know. I can't remember what JFO, I think there was a fiscal note at one point, but I'll let the commissioner answer that question.
I'm going to give you an unsatisfactory answer because that estimate didn't come from my department. I believe that was from the Department of Liquor and Lottery. So I would defer to them on construction of that. Apologies that I don't have more info there.
I'm
Sorry.
trying to get them in next week along with Graham, just so we know all the moving parts or as much of it as we can. Because this is, again, like a jigsaw puzzle and they all kind of mesh up and we should know what the other shapes are. Any other questions at this point? Senator Bray? No, you muted, Senator.
Sorry if I missed it in transferring from one program to the other and I came in, you were already speaking. Can you just say very briefly, are these gambling proceeds, are these programs the state will run, or is this how we treat someone else's pre-existing program?
I can't speak to any expertise on that, but my understanding is that they're state administered programs. But in both of the cases of the sports betting and the Keno, the Department of Liquor and Lottery are the ones who are really able to speak to those programs intelligently.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And we will get them in as soon as possible. Any other questions? If not, I think we have put in a long day. Senator Pearson, you're going to take us off live feed and